How do you form intentional, strategic connections with people in order to not be mediocre?
Oh, we're starting with an easy one, huh, Holly?
Everyone's desperately trying to be authentic, but they're completely inauthentic.
Let's talk about authenticity here for a minute, because intentional doesn't mean transactional.
I remember being in law school and them forcing us to go into these networking events with big, massive international law companies, and I'd be absolutely terrified. My biggest fear was,
I don't know the right people. To me, that's kind of a limiting belief. They don't prepare you for that.
Why would they be interested in talking to me?
There's been this hunter-hunted mentality where poor souls like you are thrown into a room with a bunch of lawyers, and that's going to kill connection.
and I do agree with what you say, but I've got doubts.
It becomes desperation, it doesn't work, it feels icky to people, and it is the definition of transactional. It's not who you know, it's the people that they know.
In this conversation, myself, Holly Cope, and Helen Pamley sit down with Ronen Olshansky, a serial entrepreneur and global networking authority. He's the co-founder of Connected Success, created alongside New York Times #1 best-selling author Keith Ferrazzi. He's written world-famous books Never Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back, and Leading Without Authority. Together, they transform how professionals build powerful connections. Ronen, a Yale University graduate, has a hugely diverse background from Wall Street to executive coaching, early stage ventures to entrepreneurship. He also founded Cross Campus, a dynamic hub for entrepreneurs. Now with Keith Ferrazzi, he focuses on teaching people to be strategic about their networking. In this conversation, Ronen really doesn't hold back on how to be intentional about the connections you make, how to avoid wasting time on the wrong people, and why most people come across as desperate. This is an absolute must listen. Ronen, both me and Helen have gone from law to entrepreneurship. Quite a big jump between the two, and I think we'll talk about your journey, but you've had a similar type of journey in that sense as well. And something that really stood out to me when I first got into entrepreneurship was a quote that I heard, which was something along the lines of, you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, or the 5 people you're most with. I really took it to heart, and I started looking at the people that I was surrounding myself with, and I was starting to become a little bit concerned, I'll say. I know that Keith Ferrazzi says that if you don't make intentional, strategic connections or relationships with people, you can easily become, like he says, mediocre, which also hit home with me. It's like, I don't want to be mediocre. So my question to you is, how do you form intentional, strategic connections with people in order to not be mediocre?
Well, we're starting with an easy one, huh, Holly? Thanks for that. Jumping right in. Boy, what a great quote. You know, you hear different versions of that quote. Show me someone's friends and I'll tell you about themselves. But also the idea, you know, you hear this in sports and in the arts, you know, play against someone better than you. That's how you get better. The way that I think about this actually is a little bit of a different framing. It's the idea of being intentional about who you invest your energy into versus scattershot, right? So when we were younger in life, let's say in our 20s, it was kind of like, oh, I met someone, they're interesting, I want to get to know them, they might be a friend. And then you invest time and maybe you do become friends and maybe you don't. But as we get into what I call our second adulthood, and by the way, I'm a big Carl Jung fan. I'm a huge Carl Jung fanboy, so I might refer to some Jungian concepts. But you know, you go through this middle passage, this struggle in the middle of your life. You come out in the second adulthood. The way that we form relationships, whether friendly or professional, is totally different. You know, we're a bit more set in our ways ideologically. We're more goal oriented, and so the way I think about this is intentionality means not being transactional and looking to keep score or looking to get something from the person, but more just thinking about intentionally, how does this person fit within my network? Do they help me potentially towards my goals? Is there commonality? Are they excellent or mediocre, or will they potentially bring me down? you ask all of these questions to evaluate, frankly, whether it's worth investing your limited time, which is our most limited resource, into that relationship.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, Ronan. And you were talking there about the second adulthood, I think, and Carl Jung. And I've looked into him in a lot of detail myself, actually. I think I'd be really interested to know a little bit more about your journey, actually, with that in mind. Because, for example, my background is that I was a lawyer. And I realized that wasn't the path for me. And I actually completely retrained as a therapist, a mindfulness-based psychotherapist. There was a lot of Jungian psychology in that. And then I became a coach. And my experience from my journey and also meeting a lot of people along that way is that if you start out in banking or law, I believe banking is your background, and somehow you find your way to therapy, coaching, these deeper levels, there's normally a very interesting backstory. And I'm just curious about you here and what your journey's been about.
Sure. Holly mentioned the jump from barrister, lawyer to content creator or coach. I mean, I've probably taken maybe a few more jumps than I should have, right? Finance to management consulting to technology to opening a bar in Brazil when I was in my 20s on an island for a year to moving to Moscow and working in the emission trading, Kyoto Protocol greenhouse gas emissions business, to then coming back to Los Angeles in 2011-12 and really starting my first real proper business, raising $30 million, launching a shared workspace business called Cross Campus. So a lot of jumps for sure. And now sort of in the latter parts of our life, we transition from doing and producing to advising and coaching and teaching, which is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
What Arthur Brooks calls going from fluid intelligence to crystallized intelligence, right? Which is, I think, a beautiful idea that we can come back to. Maybe all along I was an entrepreneur at heart, right? Maybe I had issues with authority, which a lot of entrepreneurs do, challenged my bosses or didn't like the status quo. Maybe that's what it says about me. But there's certainly been a bunch of jumps. And I think it gives me the perspective to be able to be an effective coach, right? Because there are a lot of people who are getting into coaching, let's be honest, without the requisite life experience or perspective. And I just wonder how effective they can be.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's true. And I think as well, when you come with that sort of background and that, I want to say purpose led approach because it feels purposeful from what you're saying, but I'd be curious about that too. It adds a different quality. And I think people can feel that as well. Like we can talk about networking on a superficial level. And I think some people might come at it and think, what am I trying to get out of you? I want to win more business. But actually, when we're coming from a deeper purpose led place, it has quite a different quality. Is that something that you resonate with or that you would connect with, that sort of concept?
Absolutely. I think you nailed it. I think when you are purpose or mission driven, you have a bit more of a compass. And when you look at someone new, you can ask yourself questions like, are we ideologically aligned? What is their mission, purpose? Are they interested in being of service and supporting my mission? And just as importantly, am I interested in being of service to them? Right? Because if you're leading with generosity, then you have to want to elevate this person. You can't force yourself to want to help them just because they might be valuable to you. I think you spoke to something really important, Helen, which is having a network that is diverse, right? So people like myself and yourselves who have done these interesting things and who've lived around the world, we have this diversity of experience and this diversity of perspective. And I think that makes us an interesting sort of component to someone's circle. And I think as we look out and create our own sort of constellation, oftentimes people surround themselves with the same exact person. And that's sort of a mistake or sort of it falls short because then you're not interesting and you're not dynamic and you don't have this diversity of opportunities and perspectives. So that diversity in your network is important.
So, what is it you would say that you're trying to, or you are bringing into the world through your coaching, through your teachings these days?
Mm. Well, right these days I'm focusing, as you know, because we've had this conversation, I'm focusing on the idea of can we build a system for people? Can we build a system, or rather, can we train them to design and build their own system for growing and managing their network so it is a world-class network that supports their ambitions? Can we teach conversational strategies? Can we make the whole CRM thing relatively painless and help people design it and walk through how to use it? Can we help them understand how to host bonding dinners, right? The hosting dinners is a big part of our playbook. It's something that my partner, Keith Ferrazzi, is quite literally world famous for. He's hosted hundreds of these and brought tens of thousands of people through his home in a very sort of facilitated format. And so we teach how to do that. So right now, what I'm really interested in is helping people design a system that works for them in their life, that helps them not just grow their network, but also stay on top of it. As far as the coaching work, when you start a new business, like as I did with Connected Success, you sort of have to make certain adjustments. And so I've taken down my team coaching work. I sort of miss it, and I'm in touch with my clients, but I'm not doing as much team coaching. Interestingly, though, the team coaching work that we do is based on a methodology that has the same human attributes underlying it as does our networking system. So what we call it GVA, generosity, vulnerability, and authenticity. Those same things that drive the relationships on a team in a workplace are what lead to connection between humans in your network. So that's kind of my focus right now. Yeah.
Ronen, I want to touch on something that I have heard you say, which is that networking has a negative connotation.
Mhm.
And I completely resonate with that because I remember being in law school and forcing us to go into these networking events with big, massive international law companies. And I'd be absolutely terrified. And they'd just be like, you need to go in there and just network. And I'm just like, my biggest fear was, what if I don't like the person I'm talking to and I need to back out of the conversation and I don't know how to leave a conversation? That was my biggest fear. And I just want to talk about the psychology of networking and where does this fear come from? And I think when I really think about it, it's probably the fear of rejection, putting yourself in situations where you could potentially be rejected by people who you think are completely ahead of you and would not possibly want to talk to you or give you the time of day. Do you think that people stop themselves from networking with people who are not mediocre, top people, and basically hold themselves back from being able to progress in business and in their lives because of this fear of rejection?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we could do an episode just on the fear of rejection. How do you get out of a conversation you're in at an event? I mean, there's so many wonderful, wonderful things there. But certainly, and networking having a negative connotation. By the way, in our program, I tell people you don't have to use the word networking. Say I'm developing my network or I'm investing in relationships. Use whatever term feels good. The term networking kind of feels a little icky though, because there's been this hunter-hunted mentality where poor souls like you are thrown into a room with a bunch of lawyers and they say, go make connections. And they don't train you to do that. They don't prepare you for that. So fear of rejection is a big one. Fear of being transactional, or rather, people don't like, this is sort of in human nature. We don't like feeling transactional. We don't like feeling like I reached out to someone after a year of not speaking to them. And now they're wondering, what does this person want from me? That's a limiting belief. There's also belief, and I think it's more typical among men because of patriarchal society, but also how boys were raised into men of, hey, don't ask for help because that kind of makes you seem weak, right? If you're leveraging your network, like, so we see that a lot in our program. That is a limiting belief. So yeah, I mean, this is all really, really important stuff. In the training program that we run today, Beyond Connections, the first week is all about mindset. Like, we're going to shift your mindset. You're going to think about these things differently. In fact, later today is my first live workshop with these new 93 people who just joined, and it's all about mindset. Keith and I will co-facilitate it, and it's a really fun session. We talk about networking myths, and there are a bunch of myths to dispel. We talk about limiting beliefs, and then we dive into GVA, generosity, vulnerability, authenticity.
If you'd like to learn more about Ronen's program Beyond Connections, which is a live action-oriented training experience for professionals who don't yet have the world-class network they need to win, just go to the description of this podcast episode. In the program, you'll receive weekly video content and tools, cohort learning, one-to-one personal coaching, and access to Q&A forums with Keith Ferrazzi.
I love these cornerstones that you mention around generosity, authenticity, and vulnerability, because I feel like these days, particularly authenticity, is just a term that's so banded around. You know, you'll do well on social media if you're authentic, and everyone's so desperately trying to be authentic that they're completely inauthentic. I really love where you're coming from a sort of values perspective on the networking. I've got a question on this because so my mum was actually watching mine and Holly's LinkedIn Live last week, where we were talking about winning clients and how we win them through LinkedIn. I don't know why she dialed in, because she's not supposed to. But anyway, she saw it. Or maybe she listened to the podcast. She's not meant to be listening to this stuff. Anyway, she did. And she said to me, the thing is, I don't know how, it makes me a bit uncomfortable, because you're talking about essentially talking to people with an agenda, or, building a relationship with this intentional purpose. And she was saying, I get where you're coming from, but it doesn't sit well with me. What would you say to that, Ronen? Because if we're supposed to be networking, we're supposed to be building relationships, but we have this kind of, I don't know if it's an ulterior motive, like we all want to win business. Like, how do we make peace with this?
Right. Well, first of all, I hope your mother's not getting into chat and saying, "Oh, there's my daughter Helen. I'm so proud of her." That wouldn't
be my mom. No, that would be someone else.
Someone else's mom.
Boy, that's so, what you just brought up, Helen, is such a nuanced question. And let's talk about authenticity here for a minute, because I totally agree with you. It is an overused term. Oftentimes in the program, we have to stop and say intentional doesn't mean transactional. Purposeful and intentional, it's very important to make that distinction. I can look at you and evaluate you and say, hey, I think Helen would be a person I want to invest in, and this is why, but I'm not thinking about what I can get back from her, what I can take for a while, for a long time. So there is a distinction. Authenticity, as I think about in the program, the way I frame it is there's three lenses of authenticity. There's authenticity to self, authenticity to the other person, and authenticity to the networking process. And I think what you brought up is the third one, which is kind of the most interesting one. Authenticity to self is the one we kind of hear about that's bantered often. It's like, be yourself, don't try to be someone else. Know your personal currency, what you want to offer. Fine, we get that. Authenticity to others is also pretty simple, but it's absolutely critical. It's don't be judgmental when you're meeting someone new, and have that little voice that's, we all know that we're not supposed to talk behind people's backs, but when that judgmental voice is speaking in your head, you're kind of thinking behind their back. And that's going to kill connection. You want to be curious and you want to be open-minded. So we get that, authenticity to others. But the third one's really interesting, authenticity to the networking process. Why is it? It's the question, why is it that I'm investing in this particular person? Well, if it's not transactional, and if it's not that I have an agenda specifically, well, then why is it? And we have this conversation in the program. I absolutely love it. I pose this question. So why is it? What's the reason that is what I call authentic networking? You want to hazard a guess?
Oh, well, you're being put on the spot. I was waiting for the answer.
I know, you like the punchline. Well, what is it? Think about it. What does it mean to be authentic about why you want to get to know someone? Why do you want to spend energy on that person? Well, it's really nothing more than I'm interested in finding out what makes you tick, understanding how I can be of service, and seeing how this whole relationship thing feels with you. That's it. Full stop. That's what I'm interested in. Right? What happens down the road? Who knows? There's this really simple but fundamental concept of it's not who you know, it's the people that they know. It's the people who you know, right? It's the people in their constellation. And when you're meeting someone, you don't really know all the people that they know. So you can't, quote unquote, using a term from banking here, you can't underwrite that person to say, oh, I want to invest in that person. What you can do is to say, again, I'm curious to get to know them. I want to be of service. I want to see how it feels. And if you do that and you lead with generosity consistently, guess what happens a year later? You've got intimacy, you've got depth with them, you've got likability. They are a close connection. And then if you're talking to them and saying, hey, I'm trying to do something new and I need help and advice in this front, they'll say, okay, let me think about it. Okay, I know someone who can help you. So to me, that's authentic. How does that sound? Does that sound like an authentic sort of approach?
I think I'd like to play devil's advocate.
I love it when you do this, Holly. That's why I was waiting. I knew you were going to do
No more softballs. The softballs are over. The layups are over.
Yeah. I'm just thoughts are coming up in my head as you're talking. I do agree with what you say, but I've got doubts basically, and I think what comes to mind is, like you say, lead with generosity, lead with value. Think about what you can offer that person and be open minded about who they potentially know, what you can do for them, and what they can potentially do for you as well. But the only thing that I doubt is, well, how do you know you're investing your time in the right person? What if you put all your generosity and value into this person, which is a lot of energy and effort, and then it's the wrong person? How do you avoid wasting your time?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we're getting into the tactical now, right? So I'd say two things. One, you certainly do underwrite someone to some degree. You ask yourself questions like, do they have a large network, and is it different than mine, right? If it overlaps with mine, not as interesting. They know different people. You look at their character. You think about where they're going. You think about whether they're an up and comer, whether they're a connector. All these things, as well as just, is it a good human being? So you do ask yourself those questions. The second thing I'd say is it's a process. And so you're constantly, in our system that we design, it's like every month you sit down and look at your dashboard. These are the people you're focusing on. And you ask yourself, does this person really belong there? Like, should I continue with this person? And there's nothing wrong with saying, nope, let's take them off the dashboard. Relationships are dynamic and they change over time. The final thing I'd say is we have a coach in our program, and he had a really beautiful term for it. He talked about crumbs versus truffles, right? Like in your pocket, you have crumbs, and crumbs you make available to people you just met or people you're not sure about. Hey, let me share this article with you, or yeah, I'll take a look at that website and let you know what I think, or that pitch deck, or yeah, you want an introduction to a service provider? They're like, sure, right? Those are the nuggets. But you save the truffles in your sort of right pocket, and the truffles are the really valuable things, the valuable relationship you can unlock, the things that take your time and your energy and that tap into what you're really, really smart at and smart about. And so you have to be sort of strategic. Adam Grant has a great book called Give and Take. Not sure if you've read it. Wonderful book. And he analyzes different profiles, people who are matchers, who try to match it, people who are givers, people who are takers. And at the end of the day, what it boils down to is the people that end up enjoying more success in the long run, both personally and professionally, are what he calls otherish givers, which is a very odd term. Otherish, made up the word, but it basically boils down to like strategic givers. Like you're giving, you're leading with generosity, but you have boundaries. You're watching your time spent. You're thinking about what you're getting back. And generosity is a two-way street, Holly. If you're not getting anything back, then cut it.
Yeah,
It's as much
makes
art
sense.
as science, though. Yeah. Yeah. And we've
Yeah.
all, by the way, we've all been in these situations where it's really disappointing, where we've invested in someone and then we ask for something small and it's like crickets. Nothing comes back to it. And it's just like, really? It's part of the process.
I was speaking to somebody on this podcast actually about networking in the legal industry, and he was mentioning a really interesting point that I haven't actually thought of, but it's very obvious about the fact that, if you want to network with people and you've got to do it strategically in order to avoid wasting time, of course, look at the forward thinkers. Who are the people who are looking forward, and what are they doing to be futuristic, so to speak, and go with those people, because you obviously don't want to be going with the people who are looking behind and stuck in their ways. And I thought that's a very interesting point, but then I thought, well, how do you actually figure out who the forward thinkers are? I came to the conclusion that networking is basically an instinct. Would you agree?
It's a very controversial question. I think some of these things are instinctual. And I think some of it, it's the nature versus nurture, right? Some of us have certain qualities, but I do believe that a lot of this can be taught. I believe a lot of this can be taught with mindsets, with specific practices, and some discipline. For example, like what you mentioned, let's let's be easy on ourselves. We may not be able to figure out whether a person's forward looking the first time we meet them, especially because there are people in this world, particularly people who are very intelligent, who can sort of put on a face. We've all seen this. Like, it's why interviews are so flawed. Like, they'll tell you what you want to hear. They're smart enough to do that. Have another session with them. Go out to lunch and really get deep, like open up and get vulnerable. And oftentimes when you do that, that's when the true self comes out, the true person comes out. And you may leave that lunch and say, I thought this person was very forward looking, but wow, they're stuck in the past. So be easy on yourself and realize that it's a process as you peel back the onion.
It's
Yeah.
an interesting point, actually, that one. I think it's strange because on a personal level, I think if I'm being completely honest with myself, I still have a problem with it. If I think of myself, for example, on over the years, I've done a lot of Buddhist retreats. When I go there, no one ever asks you what you do. They don't care, unless it comes up somewhere along the line in conversation. And I'm getting to know each person because I genuinely am curious about them. I want absolutely nothing from them. I do have a slight problem on a personal level if I really do that inner work and dig deep with thinking, gosh, I have this list of people and I want to network with them. And absolutely, I do this. And absolutely, this is how I operate in business. So it's like, I hear you and I do agree with you, Ronen, but I still have that slight inner turmoil. I don't know if you have any response to that.
Well, first of all, the question, what do you do, is just terrible, right? And I feel like it's more of an American. I don't know, in Europe and in England, is it as common? I feel like Americans lead with what do you do. I much prefer, tell me about yourself.
Oh, I love
Much
that.
prefer, tell me about yourself. In fact, I remember way back, I was telling Holly, I lived in London when I was much younger. After college, I worked in the city, moved from New York to London. And I remember I was at a party and I was talking to a woman. She was a French woman. I remember this very vividly. And I led with, what do you do? And she looked at me as if she was slightly offended, actually more than slightly. And she said to me, she said, you don't know me well enough to ask that. And it was like, and I engaged her in a discussion to understand that. And I'm glad I did, because at the ripe old age of 22, 23, I understood a really important lesson, which is that there's a dance to getting to know someone and to opening up. And I do believe a lot of it can be taught, and we teach it in the class. I call it the emotional contagion loop of vulnerability. You open up, you ask a great question, they open up, you affirm their vulnerability, they ask you a question, you open up a little bit more. Americans in particular, I hate to say this about Americans, but they have a reputation, and I think it's probably somewhat deserved, of, you meet someone and they just wear their life on their sleeve. Like within 5 minutes, you're hearing about their bitter divorce and how that was terrible and how they're not happy with their kids. And it's like, whoa, 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 I'm not ready for that yet. Helen, it's a bit off of your initial question about feeling transactional, but I think it's worth noting. But I think as far as how you feel, look, in an ideal world, the three of us are spending time at wonderful retreats in nature, reading books, enjoying ourselves, dancing, having a wonderful time, and just enjoying each other's company. But the reality of life is the reality of life. We have to be at least somewhat intentional about how we design this path in our life. We have to be. Uh, and so you just have to remind yourself on occasion, you are a very good human being, and thinking this way is just being an adult, just being purposeful.
That's really, really powerful, actually. I like that. Be purposeful and just be yourself and just be authentic and generous. And that's when things will come back to you. And I just love that, the idea of all that.
You'd have to remind yourself these things over time, as Helen
Yeah,
mentioned. You have this little voice and you just, and that's just called being self-aware and reflective. There's nothing wrong with that.
true. Which is super important to networking and being intentional about who you spend your time with. You've got to be self-aware and look back at yourself and think, am I in the right situation and relationship? Because there's certain things that you need to consider, like, is this person triggering something in me that I don't like, for example? And you've got to be super self-aware in this process, for sure.
It's really interesting. It brings up kind of this idea that you have to be self-aware. You also have to, it's important to have relationships. We call them lifeline relationships that are very deep. You've known each other for long enough where you can ask the difficult questions. Hey, how am I showing up? What am I doing wrong? Like those are really important relationships to have.
One big question that comes to my mind is, we've got this theme of intentional, strategic relationships, which we've established is really important. How do you figure out who are the right people that you need to get in the room with, or you need to be starting to give value to? How do you figure that one out?
I'll tell you, that is one of the more interesting, more controversial questions that we ask in the program, and everyone has a different approach. Fascinating question. I'm glad you asked it. There are different perspectives. I mean, I've noticed some people like to look at their network from like a top-down standpoint. Like I like to have people in this city because I travel a lot to that city, and I want people that are in this community or in this industry. Some people are more goal oriented. This is my goal, and I think they might be able to support me along the way. But at the end of the day, here's the other thing. People a lot of times focus on the new person. Like I need to know a different set of people. And we underestimate how much value there is in our existing network, right? Oftentimes there are people that we already know. Let's invest in deepening that relationship. And then with those deep relationships, we can ask what I call one of the golden questions. There are like two or three golden questions. And this one is, hey, who else should I be talking to? Right. So like if you get on a Zoom with someone, you say, hey, I'm looking for some advice. I want to do more public speaking. I want to set myself up for that. Do you mind getting on a call with me? They say, sure, I'd love to, Holly. Happy to invest the time. You're important to me. And you get on that call and it's helpful. It's wonderful to sort of follow up and be like, hey, either who should I be talking to, or hey, what types of people do you think I should be speaking to? And that might result in an introduction, or it might result in a different perspective. Oftentimes in my life, that's happened. Like, oh, you should think about talking to this type of person, which I never would have even thought about. Um, it's a bit of a long-winded answer to the question, or to this idea that like I need to know the right. I don't know the right people. To me, that's kind of a limiting belief. It's funny because we're in today's session, we're going to do a poll. What are your limiting beliefs? And that's one. There are, I think, 5 or 6 of them, and one of them is I don't know the right people. I think it's a limiting belief. I think you can build out your network, if you're intentional with a system, with purpose, and you will know the right people over time as long as you stay with it. And by the way, if they're not the right, if they're aspirational, but it feels really crappy. Sorry, I don't want to use expletives on this
Right,
podcast.
you're not the first, don't worry.
But if it feels crappy, if it really feels crappy and it makes you feel bad about yourself, then screw it. Like you don't need to aspire to connect with someone who's up there.
Absolutely. And just rewinding for a moment here, Ronen, just really interested for you personally, when was the first time in your life that you realized how important relationships were? Was that a
Mhm.
moment? Was it a series of moments?
Yeah, it was definitely a moment in my life, Helen. I was living in Moscow, coming to the end of a 2-year stint. Had my wife had a child, our first child, Gabriel, on the way. We moved back to the U.S. No intention of having a child in Russia, for reasons that should be apparent. Came back to Los Angeles, had Gabriel, and now I'm thinking to myself, okay, what's my next step? What am I doing? And I really wanted to start a business. But and the business that I started was about reimagining workspace. So it's community oriented. So there are events happening in the workplace. So it's well designed. The problem was my whole network was finance, and I didn't know anyone in real estate. I didn't know any brokers. I didn't know anyone who owned buildings. I didn't know any startups. And it was the first time that I realized that I needed to essentially rebuild my network to support that phase in my life and where I was going. And that's kind of when I started to develop my system, and I developed a dashboard, and I, led with generosity and tried to connect people to one another and did that very intentionally. And only by doing that was I able to grow the business cross campus, raise as much money as I did, open 7 locations, grow it to 5,000 members. None of that would have happened if I hadn't really looked at my network and said, hey, this is insufficient. I need to redesign it. That
Oh,
was the
wow.
first time I think that I was like, whoa. And I'm sure you've heard this term. build or invest in your network ahead of when you need it, because by the time you really need it, it's kind of too late. Now you're transactional. So that idea is really important, right? And a lot of people who come into our program are in this career or life transition, and their explicit goal is, I need to redesign my network to support the following, different direction.
That's such an interesting point, because that might be the key, which you failed to mention before, of basically
You've been going off now, Ronen.
Tell me.
of not being or not wasting your time, because you're giving value, you're giving generosity, and you're avoiding this negative connotation of being transactional. If you're doing it ahead of time, you're looking at the future. What might I need in the future, not right now, because then it becomes desperation.
Exactly. That's exactly it. It becomes desperation. It doesn't work. It feels icky to people. And it is the definition of transactional. Like, I need help. Look, if you are, we score relationships in terms of, this is a concept from Keith's book, Never Eat Alone, the bestseller, sold 1 million+ copies. And it's what we base the program on, is relationship quality scores, RQ scores. From 1 to 5. 1 being we're aware of each other. 5 is we are committed to each other's success. We're ambassadors for one another. But if someone's not an RQ4 or an RQ5, and you're just getting to know them, and it's within, let's say, 6 months of you first meeting them, and you're already asking for things, there's something misaligned there already. And certainly if it's within a month or 2 or 3 months and you're asking for something, there's something misaligned. You really need to take that mindset of playing the long game, investing in that person. Again, always checking in. Should I keep investing in this person? If the answer is yes, continuing to do that. Maybe every so often you get you're in a position where, like, you really need something and it's time sensitive, and there's someone who you're getting to know. It's only been 2 months, but you feel like it's on the right track, and you're like, let me take a bit of a risk and ask them for help in this one regard. So yeah, as an exception. But if you're doing it more frequently, then you're what Adam Grant calls a taker. And takers, it's exhausting, because they constantly have to replenish their network, because they're constantly taking and burning those relationships. So yeah, you're spot on. As long as you take that long view and you think to yourself, I'm investing in my network ahead of when I need it. It's like an asset. It's like any hard, tangible asset. Then you'll be able to stay within that mindset.
That's a little bit of a revelation for me.
Yeah.
I think.
Cool.
It's really cool. Yeah.
So I didn't fail. I didn't fail in mentioning that info. Wow, good to know.
Yeah, you've been officially bullied by Holly now.
Now you know what it feels like to be Helen.
Welcome to my world.
Oh.
You know what, Ronen? I want to tell you how me and Helen met, because I think you'll be quite proud of both of us, probably, actually. So we both met on LinkedIn, and what happened was, I saw Helen as somebody that I wanted to be connected with in the future. I wanted her to come on my podcast because she was, and still is, a big name in law, right? So I saw her and I thought, I want to know her. Basically, I was adding value. I was sending her comments on her posts. I was adding value to her posts. And then one day she messaged me. She came to me and she said, oh, I can see that you're living in Spain, and I want to know more about the visa processes in Spain. So I thought, bingo, this is how I can give more value. So I sent her so much information about Spain, Spanish visas, the immigration system, living in Spain, moving to Spain, everything. I think she was probably so overwhelmed with it that it prompted us to have another conversation. And then we realized we got on as friends, and the rest is history. We're now got a business together. But this is a prime example of everything that you talk about. And I wanted to share that one with you.
Yeah,
Basically.
And look, by the way, this is not a unique story. A lot of people have a story like this, which is why what we're talking about fundamentally works well, because it leads to beautiful relationships like what the two of you had. Think about this. Had she not reached out to you about Spain, none of this would have happened, right? It's kind of interesting, but it actually brings up sort of how do you, so this is always, I think the challenge is, let's say Helen had not reached out about Spain.
Mhm.
You could have at some point, after establishing that you are engaged with her thoughts and you respect her and you admire her, you could have said, hey, I have some ideas. I love what you're doing. I'd love to just get on a short call with you. So let's just replay history and do like an alternative version of history. So Helen, might you have said, sure?
This is where I'm curious, Ronan, because actually my answer would generally be no. And I know this
Yeah.
can be shocking. It's because I have a really big following, and I don't
Right.
mean that from any arrogant perspective. I get asked a lot to jump on a call with people. Now, obviously, if it's the CEO of some massive company or somebody, I'm going to be like, okay, yeah. But actually, if I can't see an obvious, I'll often say to people, what do you want to chat about? What do you want to discuss? Just because literally I would be on calls all day, every day otherwise. So
Great.
what do we do
So
here, Ronan?
let's play this out. Let's play this out. You respond and you say, Holly, I appreciate your engagement and I'm really busy, but I'd love to hear this idea that you've got and let me know. Okay, great. So then Holly records an audio note. And in the audio note, she starts describing herself and describing the idea. And by the way, she just throws in there, and so I've been living in Spain now for about 2 years, originally from London. And so, blah, blah. And so she throws that in there. When you listen to that note and you hear that she lives in Spain, all of a sudden you're like, right? Maybe you didn't see that. I mean, in this case, you saw that on LinkedIn. So my point is that sometimes, and this is the hardest thing about this process, is you just need to be on someone's radar enough to like engage them and find out more about them. And oftentimes what you'll find out is something in their personal life. And very often it's even something around their children. People's children are a real gateway. We really care about our kids. And all of a sudden you find out something about their children and you're like, oh, I can help with that. And that's your in. It's something personal. And so it's kind of this game, this beautiful game where you're spending enough time getting to know the person where you find that way that the two of you can connect. And I promise you, you can be in a room with maybe not Elon Musk because he's a very unique individual, but the CEO of the biggest company in England. But if you're able to open up and get them to open up and and find the human side, there will be something where you can either be of service or even just connect and be like, let's keep discussing that. Let's keep sharing our thoughts about longevity, for example, irrespective of where they are in their career in the world. There is serendipity to this process.
Yeah, there is. It's very tricky, very, very difficult. And I think that, it was just lucky that Helen wanted to know about Spain and that she it was just all over my profile. And but other than that, I would have struggled because it's like, how do you know? You can't read someone's mind. You don't know what they might want from you and what you can give. It's so difficult.
I mean, I don't know if this is an answer, but at least this is a framing, is the idea, and I think I've heard it called the Kettering principle, is the idea of momentum and motion. So like, just do things, go out and comment on posts, go to an event, bump into people, because if you're staying at home and you're not commenting on the posts and you're not engaging with people, then none of that's going to happen. So it's like, you got to create your own serendipity. Look, I have, one topic we haven't discussed, which I think is a fascinating topic, is how we make deep friendships later in life, how we form. That's a topic we can spend a bunch of time on. One of my closest friends, a lifeline, someone I've known for 3 years, who I go to breakfast with him every Friday morning. We went to Burning Man together. I'm involved in his children's lives. He's involved in my kids' lives. I met him because I was at a restaurant in Venice with a friend, and there was a table of interesting, attractive looking women next to us, and we started to chat them up. And one of them was his daughter. And she said, you know what? My dad's looking for like guy friends. I think you and him would get along really well. And she set us up. She'd like set us up on a man date in a weird way. And we went to breakfast and there was so much to talk about. And then we did it again and it was like, wow, there's so much here. And we're like, you know what, let's make this a Friday thing. Look, had I not reached over, and I could easily have been like, you know what, I'll leave them to their devices. I'm not going to reach over. But if I hadn't done that, none of that would have happened. Just take risks, just do things, just go out and do things and bump into people and take risks, basically.
I absolutely love this. And I feel like we need another episode for deep friendships and Burning Man specifically. I still haven't been to Burning Man and I'm desperate to go. So that intrigues me very much. But I think what you're talking about here is super, super interesting. And I think there's something about, this is a whole topic in itself. And I realize we're coming to the end of this one, but I think something about that self-confidence, that self-belief, and that in itself is magnetic, that you go in there and you think, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to, I as a human have value. Why wouldn't they want to talk to me? Because that's what I hear a lot from people. Like, why would they be interested in talking to me? How can I put myself out there? And I think this for me is the inner work that we all have to do to get to a place where we believe truly that we are of value as a human. This goes beyond all this corporate jargon, all this stuff. Would you agree with that, Ronen?
100%. I'll tell you, I mean, I so agree with that, Helen. And that was one of the aha moments when we first ran the Beyond Connections program this summer. It was the inaugural 65 people from around the world, and people from countries, India, Poland, Singapore. It was amazing to see what people came out of the program with, because for some people, not everyone, but for some people, it wasn't just the system and the practices, but like, it completely changed the way they thought about themselves. Like, they said things like, wow, now I'm not afraid of someone saying no to me. I'm like, wow, we did that? Or, someone said in particular, this one gentleman said, this program let me be who I am. I'm like, wow. And so much of it, of the value, I didn't realize it going into it, was this idea of mindset and limiting beliefs. And what you said is so critical, is, one thing that I find helpful, I call it the zone of indifference. Have you ever heard the term the zone of indifference?
No.
When we want to reach out to someone and it's scary, and what if they say no, and that little voice is saying, what can I offer to them? Realize there's only so much you can control. You can do what you do. You have no control over how they react or what happens. You need to be as indifferent as possible to the results. And you owe it to yourself and the people who depend on you, your family, your team, whatever, to just reach out and just put yourself in that zone of indifference. Because if you're not, then you've got that little voice in your head. And that voice is typically not a positive voice. We know that, right? It's a questioning voice. It's not serving us oftentimes, but so many of us have that voice, and it holds us back. And when that voice is speaking to us, if we don't quiet it, then the person we're trying to connect with feels that. That's the thing. People feel when you're being inauthentic. They kind of have the sense that something's off. That's what happens when you've got that voice in your head.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you just said. It's really important for a lot of people.
I've got so many questions.
How long have you got, Ronen? I feel like we could sit here for like 5. I've got more questions than I started with. My list is getting longer.
Well, that's a good sign. No, I would love to do this again.
If you'd like to learn more about Ronen's program Beyond Connections, which is a live action-oriented training experience for professionals who don't yet have the world-class network they need to win, just go to the description of this podcast episode.